So far, we created a simple React application to work with some test data. We created three components: app, article list, and article. And we talked a little bit about the components' responsibilities and how to decide on what data elements and behavior elements to pass down the components tree. However, we have not written any tests for our components. We've been testing things manually. And in the next few clips, we're going to make some changes here. So without having any tests to confirm that the changes are not going to break things, we will be in the dark. So we already have Jest here configured for this application, so we can simply add some tests for the components. Now, there are two major types of tests we can do here. We can add normal tests, tests that will test certain logic in our code. And we can also use Jest-Snapshot-Testing feature. So let me show you what that means. Under the components folder, let's add the Jest tests folder. We're going to start by testing the article list component. This means that we have to understand the dependency of this article list component. So this article list component depends on having an article object, and inside that object, it expects an object that has an ID attribute. It also expects another property, article actions, which is another object. So we're going to fake this dependency just to smoke test this article list component. So inside the test component, let's create a new file, call it article list test.js. I'm going to start by bringing in some dependencies. So we need React because we're going to be rendering components. We also need the component that we're testing. So we're going to bring in the article list component from up one level article list because now we're in the tests directory. We're going to also bring in the React test renderer. So import renderer from the React test renderer library. This is the library we're going to use to create the React components snapshots. So we'll bring in this as a dependency. So --div. And now we can test. So in here, again, we need to bring in the test syntax. So we're going to describe the article list component. And in here, we want to make sure that it renders correctly. Inside the test, we use the renderer. So we do renderer.create the article list component. Let me actually show you how that looks like. So let's just render a div. And let's put this in a variable, call this variable element. And I'm just going to console log that variable. Let's run Jest. Now we're seeing this variable right here. It's a React test instance. So this is the actual instance of the element, and it has a lot of information that I don't really need for the test. So there's one thing we can do is we can convert this to JSON. So if we do JSON, it would give me the actual object representation of that element. So this is much better. This is a lot easier to test. And when we start rendering nested elements, they all going to be inside this children property. So this is practically a tree. So now let's go back to rendering our article list. And again, I need to pass in all the dependencies of this article list. So we figured out that this article list depends on an articles object, and it also expects an article actions object as well. So we need to fake those for the article list. And doing that is really simple. Let's have an object here, call this test props, and it will have articles. And in here, we'll just have some test data. So I'm going to do two articles, one article A and another article B. And I'll pass these articles as test props to the article list. Now, every article object is required to have an ID attribute. So let's make sure that we have an ID attribute here as well. And then the other thing that the article list expects is an article action object, which has many things. Now, this is going to be a full render, so it will actually render the article components and invoke everything inside the article components. So I need to pass in an actual lookup author here for the author component to look it up. Now we can just use a mock. Instead of an actual lookup author function here, we can just do just.fn. This will give me a mockup function. And since the author component expects the lookup author function to return an object, we will return a fake object. So in here, the default implementation is going to be just a fake object, just like that. And now we can pass these test properties to the article list component. So we'll just spread them here. And this will render the article list component. In fact, let's take a look. Fix this typo. And it's also this here. Now we're seeing the tree. So we've got type, props, children. And I have 2 children because I passed in 2 articles. So now we can write our expectations. The first expectation we can do is a snapshot expectation. So we're expecting the tree to match snapshot. And the first time you run it, it will create a snapshot of the article list component. And every time you run it, it will just compare the new snapshot to the old snapshot. So if anything changes in the article list component or its children, then the snapshot is going to fail. So let me show you what that means. If you look under snapshot, and the snapshots, by the way, belongs to your search control, so we're going to commit that. If you look under snapshot, you'll see an actual representation of the article list component. Let's see how valuable that is. Let's say that after having this snapshot here, we went to this article list component and we want to start refactoring things. So instead of passing an article as an object, we're going to go ahead and spread this article. And the minute I save, I have a failing test. So this one line added a lot of value to my tests because I now have confirmation that my components are not rendering. So let's go back and fix that and go back to successful here. Now, sometimes you'll change your component and the change will be valid. For example, let's go to article and go to the styles here and maybe change the date to be 08 instead of 085. This is a valid change. I am actually changing the markup of my components. So this will cause the snapshot to fail, but it will give you the exact difference of what's going on. So the font size was 8.5 and now it's 8. Do you want this to be the new snapshot? Do you want to consider this as a valid change and update the snapshot that we have on file? And if you do, you can just hit the U button, and the U button is going to update the snapshot. So now the snapshot has the 8 value instead of the 8.5 value. So this snapshot testing is a quick thing you can do for every component really, and have a validation that the component is rendering as the previous time you rendered it. So I encourage you to always do snapshot for all the components, but snapshot is not the only thing we can test, right? We have the tree itself and we have our code that we need to test. Now, it's very important that you pick the right things to test. For example, this part here is my own code. I'm here mapping an array of articles into an array of article components. So that's a thing I should test. I should test that the children of this article list component corresponds to whatever object I pass in. So since I passed in an object with 2 records, I should test that the component outputs 2 children. And that's really easy since I have this children attribute on the tree. So I can do something like expect the tree.children.length to be 2. And that's it. Now I have an extra test that confirms the mapping operation that I just did in the article list component.